The helicopters roared above the prison yard as thick smoke drifted across the open space. Below, hundreds of inmates stood together, holding their ground. Guards and state troopers lined up outside the walls, waiting for the order. Then it came. Tear gas filled the air. The noise became overwhelming. In seconds, everything changed. This was the moment no one expected inside one of America's toughest prisons. But how did a prison, built to control everything, lose control so completely? To understand this, we have to go back. It was September 1971, at Attica Correctional Facility in New York. Attica was known as one of the most secure prisons in the United States. It held more than 2,000 inmates, most serving long sentences. The rules were strict. The environment was controlled. But behind the walls, life was difficult. Most inmates spent long hours locked in their cells. Basic needs were limited. Communication with family was restricted. Many prisoners felt they were not being treated fairly. For years, small complaints had been ignored. Meals were simple and often not enough. Medical care was slow. Letters took time to arrive. And many inmates felt they had no voice. Still, the prison system continued as usual. Marcus Hale had been at Attica for 3 years. He was in his early 30s, quiet and careful. He followed rules and stayed out of trouble. Like many others, he hoped to finish his sentence and leave. But even Marcus could feel the tension building. In the yard, conversations had changed. People spoke more about fairness, about rights, about change. One afternoon, Marcus sat with another inmate named Thomas Green. "They are not listening," Thomas said quietly. "People are getting tired." Marcus looked around the yard. Groups of inmates stood close together, talking in low voices. "What do you think will happen?" Marcus asked. Thomas paused. "Something," he said. "Something big." At first, nothing seemed to change. Days passed. The routine stayed the same. Wake up. Count. Eat. Work. Return to the cell. But small moments began to stand out. Guards became stricter. Searches were more frequent. Some inmates were punished for small rule violations. The pressure continued to grow. On September 9th, everything changed. That morning began like any other. Inmates moved through the routine, following orders. But during a movement between cells and the yard, confusion started. A gate was opened at the wrong time. A group of inmates moved in a way that guards did not expect. Then suddenly, control was lost. Inmates rushed forward. Doors were blocked. Guards were overwhelmed. Within minutes, a large part of the prison was taken over by the inmates. Marcus found himself pushed along with the crowd into the yard. He did not plan it. He did not expect it. But now he was part of it. The yard filled quickly. Hundreds of inmates stood together. Some shouted. Others stayed quiet, trying to understand what was happening. For the first time, the prison was not fully under control of the guards. It was a shocking moment. But what happened next was even more surprising. Instead of chaos, something unexpected began to form. The inmates organized themselves. They created groups to keep order. They selected spokesmen to talk for them. They began to make clear demands. They asked for better living conditions, fair treatment, access to basic rights. Marcus watched closely. This was not what he had imagined. "I thought it would be chaos," he said to Thomas. Thomas shook his head. "People just want to be heard," he replied. Outside the prison, news spread quickly. Officials gathered. Negotiations began. Observers were brought in, including journalists and community leaders. They listened to the inmates' demands and helped communicate between both sides. For several days, the situation remained tense but controlled. Food was shared. Meetings were held. Voices were raised, but there was also calm. It was a surprising reality. Many people outside expected violence and disorder. But inside, there was structure. Marcus began to feel something new, hope. Maybe this would lead to change. Maybe things would improve. But not everyone agreed. Some officials believed control needed to be restored quickly. They saw the situation as dangerous. Time passed. Negotiations continued, but progress was slow. The demands were clear, but decisions were difficult. Inside the yard, tension returned. Food supplies became uncertain. Sleep was limited. Fear grew. Marcus noticed the change. At night, conversations became quieter. During the day, arguments increased. The pressure was returning. Thomas spoke again one evening. "This can't last forever," he said. "Something is going to happen." Marcus nodded. He could feel it too. Then came the final day. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Inmates stood in the yard, waiting. Watching. Then the sound of helicopters filled the sky. Marcus looked up. "This is it," someone said nearby. Moments later, tear gas filled the yard. Visibility dropped. People coughed and covered their faces. Then forces moved in. Everything happened fast. The control the inmates had held for days was gone in minutes. Marcus tried to stay calm, remembering what he had learned over the years. Stay low. Stay quiet. Follow movement. But the confusion was overwhelming. When it was over, the yard was silent again. Control had returned to the authorities. But the cost was high. Lives were lost. Many were injured. The prison was changed forever. Marcus sat back in his cell later that day, trying to understand everything. What had started as a protest became one of the most important prison events in American history. And the truth was clear. Prisons are built for control. But when pressure builds over time, even the strongest systems can be challenged. Marcus looked at the walls around him. They were the same. But everything felt different. And one question stayed in his mind. If it happened once, could it happen again? The smoke had barely cleared when the silence returned. It was not a peaceful silence. It was heavy, controlled, watched. Inside the prison, everything had changed. Marcus sat on the cold floor of his cell, his back against the wall. His hands were still shaking slightly. The noise from earlier, the helicopters, the shouting, the confusion, still echoed in his mind. Now, there was only quiet. But this quiet felt different. More guards walked the corridors than before. Their steps were firm and steady. Orders were short. Movements were limited. The system had taken back control. But at a cost no one inside would forget. In the hours after the yard was cleared, inmates were moved one by one. Each person was searched carefully. Questions were asked. Names were recorded. Marcus stood still when it was his turn. He followed every instruction. Face the wall. He did. Hands behind your back. He obeyed. The process was slow, but exact. There was no room for mistakes. Afterward, he was returned to his cell. The door closed again. But something was different now. Before, the cell had felt like a place of waiting. Now, it felt like a place of reflection. Days passed. The prison stayed on full lockdown. No yard time. No group movement. No normal routine. Meals were passed through the slot in the door. Lights stayed on longer. Guards checked cells more often. Marcus tried to keep track of time, but it became harder. Morning felt like night. Night felt like morning. This is one of the realities many people do not see. After a major incident, control becomes even tighter. The system focuses on preventing anything from happening again. But that also means more isolation. More silence. More time alone. Marcus lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the days in the yard. He thought about the voices, the discussions, the hope that something might change. For a brief moment, the inmates had spoken together. And then it was gone. From the next cell, a voice whispered, "Marcus." It was Thomas. "You still there?" Thomas asked. "Yeah," Marcus replied quietly. There was a pause. Then Thomas spoke again. "They're saying a lot of people didn't make it." Marcus closed his eyes. He had heard similar whispers from the guards, from distant voices in the corridor. But hearing it from Thomas made it real. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Another pause. "Now," Thomas said slowly. "Now everything changes." Outside the cells, investigations had already begun. Officials needed to understand what happened. Reports were written. Statements were collected. The Attica Uprising had become national news. People across the United States, and even in other countries, were watching. For many, it was shocking. A prison known for strict control had experienced one of the most serious uprisings in history. Questions were being asked. Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? What conditions led to this moment? Inside the prison, Marcus did not see the news reports. But he felt the results. The guards were more alert than ever. Rules were enforced with greater precision. Even small actions were watched closely. One morning, the lights turned on earlier than usual. A voice came through the speaker. All inmates remain in position. Inspection in progress. Marcus sat up on his bed. Moments later, a group of officers walked past his cell. They checked every detail. Bars, locks, windows. Nothing was missed. When they reached Marcus's cell, one officer stopped. He looked at Marcus for a moment. Then he moved on. No words were needed. The message was clear. Everything was being monitored. Later that day, Marcus noticed something else. The prison was quieter than it had ever been. Not just calm. Silent. Inmates spoke less. Movements were slower. Even the usual background noise was gone. It was as if everyone was thinking at the same time. Trying to understand. Trying to adjust. That evening, Marcus sat on his bed and remembered something Thomas had said before everything happened. People just want to be heard. Marcus wondered if anything had changed. Outside the prison, the Attica Uprising had already started to affect public opinion. For the first time, many people began to look more closely at prison conditions. New discussions began about how inmates were treated. Some changes would come in the years ahead. But inside the prison, change felt far away. Here, the focus was on control. On order. On making sure nothing like this would happen again. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, parts of the routine returned. Short movements. Limited yard time. Careful supervision. Marcus stepped outside into the yard again for the first time since the incident. The space looked the same. But it felt completely different. There were fewer people. More guards. Less talking. Marcus walked slowly, looking around. He saw Thomas standing near the fence. They nodded to each other. No words were needed. Both understood. Everything had changed. They sat down on opposite sides of the yard, keeping distance as required. After a few minutes, Thomas spoke quietly. "They think this fixed it," he said. Marcus looked at him. "Did it?" Marcus asked. Thomas shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "It just pushed everything back down." Marcus thought about that. The pressure. The silence. The control. It was all still there. Just deeper now. The system had responded. But the reasons behind the uprising had not simply disappeared. This was another truth many people outside did not see. Events like this do not come from nowhere. They build slowly. And even after they end, the effects remain. Marcus stood up and looked toward the high walls of the prison. They were strong. Solid. Unmoving. Built to keep everything inside. But now he understood something important. The real story of prison life is not just about walls or rules. It is about people. About pressure. About what happens when voices are not heard. As the sun began to set, the yard was cleared again. Inmates returned to their cells. Doors closed one by one. The familiar sound echoed through the building. Marcus sat back on his bed. The same cell. The same walls. But a different understanding. He no longer saw prison as just a place of punishment. He saw it as a system. A system that worked most of the time. But one that could still be challenged. And as he lay down, one thought stayed with him. If the system had been pushed once, what would happen if it was pushed again?